everyone, it's Ileana and I have a really long video for you today. It is this magic slider card and I am going to do my best to narrate this as best I can because it is a very long video. So first I am starting off with some Pixie spray on the back of my MFT mini cloud stencil. I'm going to be using some Bristol cardstock because I am going to be doing some ink blending and some Zig clean color markers on this. So I'm starting off with my Picket Fence life-changing brushes, and I'm going to be using my Distress Oxides, and I am starting off with Tumbled Glass for my ocean. I'm sorry, not my ocean, for my clouds. And this stencil I've probably used in several videos, and it is very versatile and I really love it. Now for my ocean waves, I am using the Lawn Fawn border dies, and I am just cutting it out of some cardstock, and it is an A2 card front, and that way I'm able to use my Pixie spray, and then I can line everything up into that corner and have everything match perfectly. I do have a piece of Post-it tape down at the bottom so that it's masked off so that I could add my sand later. But for now, I'm just going to add a little bit more clouds. I don't like that bare white spot at the bottom, so I added the bottom half of my homemade stencil, and I added a little bit more color so that it wouldn't be such an odd transition between cloud and the ocean. Once that's done, I'm going to add another strip of Post-it tape above that horizon line just so that I have a clean piece of Post-it tape right there. I don't want to get any of that salty ocean distress ink on my embossing ink pad. So I'm just pouncing that. I'm going to pull it away onto a fresh sheet so that I could pour this embossing powder back into the container. I am using a Hero Arts sand embossing powder. It came in a card kit long ago. I don't know if it's available, but if you don't find it there, you can always use the Brutus Monroe one called Sandcastle. When I pulled that Post-it tape up, some of the embossing powder went up into that salty ocean, and so I'm just using a clean brush to wipe it away. I'm going to go ahead and melt my embossing powder and get ready for the next step. I am taking the frame from the add-on to the magic slider, and I'm just going to center it onto the front of the card panel, and I'm going to set aside those pieces for later. You'll see what I'm going to be doing at a later point. So I am taking the largest piece from the magic slider set, and I'm going to line it up onto the MISTI just so that I have some idea of where I'm going. I have that little insert where the window would be so that I know where my little boat needs to be when I stamp it. And I'm going to be using my VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink because I'm going to be doing some heat embossing. So I'm going to stamp it a couple of times, and then I will add some ICiCLE embossing powder. I did prep my card panel with an anti-static bag, and so that way the embossing powder doesn't stick where it's not supposed to. So here is where I'm going to get all fancy with how I'm going to assemble this. So I am just adding a little bit of purple tape so that it holds the frame together, and then that way I know where everything needs to be and where I can add my water. So I'm going to go ahead and line up the stencil with the back of the card because remember they're the same size. So now my water will be exactly where it needs to be. I'm going to add a little bit of a mask so that the bottom of my boat does not get any Distress Oxide in it. And once that's done, I'm going to peel it up, and then I'm going to add my clouds to it. So I'm just checking my placement, and you can see that everything is going to match. And so I'm using my stencil again, and now I'm going to use the tiniest brush in the Picket fence set. These do come in handy. That way I don't have to do too much masking, but in the end I end up masking. So I'm lining everything up, finding that same part of the stencil that I used, so I will have matching clouds so that it will all look consistent. You don't really have to do this, but it's my OCD. I just can't help it. I did cut the rest of that mask, and I'm adding it back onto the ship, and now I'm going to add a little bit more of the tumbled glass just because it looked too bare, and so I'm just adding a little bit more so that you could see it behind the ship's flag. Once again, I don't like the way the bottom of the sky looks, so I'm just going to add a little bit more to where the sky meets the water. So I just put that mask back on, and I'm just adding it. Just full disclosure, I've made this card 3 times, and each time that I've gone to make it, I have a totally different process. So I did make this card 3 times. Now I'm just going to go ahead and color it with my Zig Clean Color pens, and that's why I use the Bristol, because there's a coating on the Bristol that helps the Zig markers just blend better on it. It works for any watercolor marker really, and so I'm just going to go ahead and color everything in. I also noticed too that the blender pen makes a big difference. I like using the blender pen instead of using a water aqua brush. It's just, to me, it's a little more fun to do it this way. So I'm just going to add 2 shades of brown. I have a lighter brown and then a darker brown at the bottom because, you know, it's darker down at the bottom, shadows, and I'm just using the blender pen to pull the colors together. And if you mess up, you could use the blender pen kind of like as an eraser, and you just pull up the color and you just wipe it off onto a scrap piece of paper and clean off the nib of that marker. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few little lines so that it looks like wood onto my ship, and this part is done. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my little die cut back in place, and that way I know exactly where to die cut it, because I did not trace the outline to this. It'd be easier if you traced it. So now I'm going to trace it. I'm doing the exact same thing for this and for the inside of the panel, and I'm going to be doing the same process. I am lining up my stencil with that little tiny die cut, and I'm not worried about masking or stamping my image first, because I'm going to be doing the treasure chest and it's dark, and I know that the lid of the treasure chest will cover up any of the blue sky, so I didn't bother stamping and then masking. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stamp my treasure chest. So I'm going to line everything up back into my MISTI, and I do have the little lines of where the die will go, so it'll make it easier for me when I go to die cut everything. So I just lined up the treasure chest where I want it to go, and I'm going to go ahead and dry my panel because I am going to be using some clear embossing powder, and I don't want it to stick to my clouds. Otherwise I won't be able to color, because the embossing powder will act as a resist, and so I want to make sure that that's dry before I add my embossing powder. So once that's all set, I can go ahead and jump right in and color. Before I do that, I'm going to add my sand to where the treasure chest is sitting. So I just kind of drew a little arc, and I did use this embossing powder that comes like in a lip gloss, and it works really well for this. So I went ahead and just added that embossing powder, and then added the and then heat set it. I'm going to go ahead and erase any lines that I may not have covered up with the embossing powder, and it's okay if it's uneven because it is a beach and sand is not even. So I'm going to go ahead and add my water, and so I'm going to do the same method. I'm just going to line up my stencil with that little block, and then I'm going to remove the block. And now I'm going to mask the treasure chest. And as you all know, I have a piece of metal underneath my craft mat, and so I'm able to use my MISTI magnets to hold things down on my desktop. What I'll do now is I'll just go ahead and color everything in, and you don't need to see that part because I've already done it. Now I'm going to assemble everything together. So I'm going to use my slider ruler to help me score, or not score, it's already scored, but it'll help me bend these little tiny little flaps down. And I didn't do a very good job on one of them, but you get the gist of it. You just add your die cut into the slot of the MISTI, into the slot of the cut-a-line, and you're able to use the edge to bend those small pieces together. So once that's all done, I'm going to go ahead and add 1/8 inch of the paper lined adhesive, and I'm just going to bend those down. Onto the other side, I'm going to add the same adhesive to the track. And the slider is actually really easy to put together. I thought it was going to be complicated, but I did this a couple of times and it turned out to be really, really easy to do this. So now you're just going to pop in that slider into the back of it, and you just line it up into the back, and then you tuck these little pieces in, and now you're able to slide it back and forth. So once I get it lined up, I'm going to add a little bit of of this anti-static powder to it, just to remove any sticky that may be in, that might hold things up. And then I'm just going to remove the backers and then close the little slider. So you can see that it's going to slide back and forth. And I'm just going to go ahead and play with it until I get it to run smoothly. Now I'm going to pull the handle out, and I'm going to color it with my Distress Oxides, and then I'm going to take that little piece that I had cut out earlier from my original panel, and I'm going to use that piece to decorate the little tab so it's all matchy-matchy. Isn't that cool? So I'm just going to use some purple tape and run it through my die cutter, and now I've added some of the sticky tape to the back of it, and now I'm lining everything up. So now when you pull it, it all matches, and it looks pretty cool. Now I'm adding a little piece of the Thermoweb foam, self-adhesive foam. I didn't have my original footage from this video, and so I used one of my first tries, and so that's why the little boat does not match. At first I did the stamp that was in the set, and I actually liked the final version better than the this one here. I just wanted to show you how you can add the adhesive to that slider part and just remove the backing, and then you just pop that panel up to the front. So like I said, this isn't the final card that I made. This is just one of my first practice runs, and every time I made this card, I did something different in each one. So I'm just going to take the sentiment and stamp it onto a piece of vellum, and I just lined it up on the bottom of the MISTI, and then I moved it up before I mounted it, because I'm going to once again get all fancy with the die cutting. Now I did lose the comma of the stamp set, and I am so annoyed. I don't know about you, but just losing a stamp, even as tiny as a comma, just really, really bothers me. I looked for it for half an hour and could not find it, so I pulled a comma out of a different stamp set just so that I could have the sentiment be grammatically correct. But I don't know about you, but it really bothers me when I lose a stamp. I'm just going to go ahead and heat set that, and I did use some Raven embossing powder, and I want the sentiment to go on the very bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up with the die, and because it's vellum, you could see right through it, and so I'm going to line it up, and then I'm going to run that through my die cutter. Once it's completely cut out, I'm going to take my cut-a-line and I'm just going to cut the bottom of that frame out just so that I have that sentiment. You could stamp the sentiment on the actual frame, but it's kind of orange peely and I didn't think it was going to work well, so I decided to do vellum. And I did use this plus vellum adhesive and it works fabulous. You cannot see the adhesive on the back of that. I didn't show my coloring of my palm trees and my little girl. I just figured it's the same kind of coloring. So I just stamped it, colored it, die cut it. And now I'm adding some Wink of Stella just so that I can have a little bit of bling, and my card is complete. I hope you liked this video and enjoyed it. Sorry it was so long. And sorry I got tongue-tied, but be sure to hit the like and the subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.